When glass actually freezes. Yeah.
Hey everybody. So this is fiction writing and lore in the Elder Scrolls Online. It's going to be a little bit different than a lot of the presentations we've had because we can't really tell you what we're working on because spoilers. So what we're going to do is tell you a little bit about the way we work, how the department is organized, and what our jobs are. I'm Wim McLaughlin, I'm the lead writer. This is Lawrence Schick, lead lore master. We're sort of two halves of the creative brain over here, working on lore, as you probably suspect, is a huge full-time job on this game. So let's get to it. So this is our writing team. This is the picture we took for our AMA, and a little bit about my background. I've been a professional writer for about 20 years now. The last 12 years in the game industry, I started as a contract writer on the Command & Conquer games for Westwood Studios. And then after they went out of business, I decided I wanted to enter the game industry full-time and became a designer. I spent some time working for NCSoft on Tabula Rasa, which is where I met our creative director, Paul Sage. He was the lead designer on that game. And then I moved to BioWare Austin for Star Wars: The Old Republic, shipped that one, and then Paul brought me up here. So I've been here for 2.5, almost 3 years now.
Script writing.
Scream, yes, I'm sorry. My first 10 years in the industry, my first 10 years in my career as a writer was as a film and TV writer. I did some low-budget direct-to-cable stuff, and if anybody is old enough to remember the series Silk Stockings on USA Network, wrote a couple of episodes of that. Real quality stuff. The game industry's better. So just to let you know about sort of the way we work here. So this floor here, probably 3/4 of it is content, and it's a mix of level designers, some environmental artists, but mostly content designers and writers. And our writing team. So our content department is split into what we call zone teams, or content teams. And they are assigned a particular chunk of content, and everybody works on it from the beginning. We usually have some kind of a high-level idea of what the theme of the zone is, or what kind of history we're going to do for it. That generally comes from Lawrence. And then they take that and they write up our design documents, and the writers participate in that, generating ideas and things. So when it comes time when we know what we want to do with like a particular POI, the writers actually don't generally write the first pass dialogue. Our content designers do. Now, each of these teams also, there's a writer embedded in each content team, but there's also a writing team. So Lawrence and I run the writing team, and then they also have content leads in each of the zone teams, which is a little tricky to manage. But we have bi-weekly meetings, actually 3 times a week, with the writing team. We all keep in contact, we review everything. But they spend a lot of time actually embedded in the teams working with the content designers. So first pass on, say, a new point of interest in the game, they'll go through, document it all out, and start the first iteration. So there'll be a particular quest arc they'll go through, and they'll set it up, they'll write the first pass dialogue. And actually some of our content designers are really good writers. Bethesda Game Studios, the Skyrim guys, actually do hybrid writer-designers. We have such a huge amount of content to do that we need a writing team specifically, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But so the reason why we don't have the writers actually go through what we call a fiction pass on those right away is because we're iterating on gameplay. We want to make sure that it's fun to play, it's understandable, and it's cool before we go in and spend all this time writing all the VO dialogue, which is really consuming. If we decide, it's a teardown or there's going to be major changes, that's a lot of wasted work. So we want to get a first iteration. We get our leads to do a playthrough, our creative director, our lead designer, and the zone lead, and then Lawrence and myself, and we get notes back. We iterate it a few times until everybody's happy with it. Then it goes to the zone team's writer, and they do what's called a fiction pass. Okay. I got ahead of myself here. I should be looking here instead of there. So they go to the fiction pass stage. This is basically what I just went over. Fiction pass. Once we're solid with gameplay, the fiction pass starts. Fiction pass is really deep. It's not just the VO dialogue, although that's a really important part. But we're also doing journal entries. We're doing NPC names, lore books that are involved with it, even things like monster abilities. If there's a particular monster that has a particular attack, and that's likely to be player facing, it shows up in a death recap or something, we want to make sure that that name is lore appropriate and cool. So there's a lot to it. It takes a long time to go through and do all of this. This pass is also where we add what we call flavor conversations. Flavor conversations are the additional questions you can ask after the quest is bestowed to ask for more information. It's completely optional material, a deeper delve into lore. I'll get into that a little bit later. So in most cases when we're dealing with, say for example, a quest bestowal, player clarity is our most important thing. We want the player to know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. So clarity of storytelling. Simple, easy to understand, and this is really important. I always say this, whether it's a level 50 quest or a level 1 quest, at the beginning of the storyline, whether it's a quest arc or a new quest, I want somebody who knows nothing about Elder Scrolls to come in, read that dialogue, and know what's expected of them. They might not understand the nuances of the political situations, but they know what they're being asked to do, where they need to go, and why they're being asked to do it. So that's very, very clear, very, very important. Clarity trumps lore. Now, when we get down, lore terms are also awesome. We love lore. We love lore books. We love flavor conversations that delve deeper into it. So what we do is we have the writers ask themselves the question, as a player, I've gotten this quest. What questions might I want to ask about this person who gave me the quest, about this area, as many things as we can think of. And that's what makes up our flavor conversations. And that's a much deeper delve. Again, optional, but important. That's where we do most of our lore. So for example, it's a quest about werewolves. In the bestowal, we say werewolves, not Hircine's curse, because then the player's like, well, what does that mean? And then they go off and, oh, this is about werewolves. We want them to know up front what's going on. But then the NPC may mention Hircine, and there may be a question, who's Hircine? What is Hircine's curse? And we get into that deeper amount of lore as we go. Things that we're trying to avoid, and this is part of the difficulty of the job, exposition and what we call bookending, or if you, I don't know, from old EverQuest players, hailstorms, where you would ask an NPC a question by hitting H to hail them and get this huge block of text with way too much information. We don't want to do that. We also don't want to fall into the trap, which happens in a lot of RPGs, where you start the quest with a big lore dump. Then you go, you fight some guys, you touch some things, and at the end of it, you turn in the quest, and you get another big lore dump that tells you what just happened. It's not realistic, it's not fun, it's not dramatic. So we try and find ways to sort of meet the story out as we go, and there's a lot of ways to do this. Different optional flavor conversations on NPCs. If you're doing a quest and an NPC is following you on the quest, every single time the quest updates, we try and give them a new greeting, so you can click on them and get more information. We also do theater, which are the scenes where you're not clicking on an NPC, it's either being triggered when you enter an area or by events that are going on or something you just completed where a little scene plays out, which you see all the time in the game and in Skyrim, where NPCs are talking, casting spells, or doing whatever, and it's telling a story. Again, completely optional, because you don't need to watch it. You can turn around and leave or do whatever you want to do. But these are the types of things we do to try and tell more story during the course of gameplay and make the player feel involved rather than just, I was told to kill 6 of these guys and get a doohickey and then come back. So that's very, very important. Another big part of my job, pop culture references and anachronisms. It's funny, in previous games that I've worked at, I've been the biggest offender in these because I love pop culture references, I love puns. In the right game, they're hilarious. In Elder Scrolls, they don't fit. It's established, through 9 games, we just don't do it. Or we try not to do it. So a big part of my job and Lawrence's job is policing these, chasing them down. And it's funny because sometimes it's unintentional. One of the writers will come up with what sounds like a great line. Oh, time for some thrilling heroics. And they don't, oh, that's great. I don't know where I got that from. And then I play through it and I go, wait a minute. That's Firefly, I know. So we try and recognize those things and say, we want to get that sort of the spirit of the line without verbatim using the line. So that's a very big deal. Anachronisms is another thing. there's some leeway. Generally, we go back and we say, well, if it's like medieval, Shakespearean, you know, a couple of centuries old and it feels archaic, well, it could be real in the Elder Scrolls, but certain things aren't. And there are certain terms that aren't. The hell, there is no concept of hell in the Elder Scrolls. It's oblivion. So to oblivion with you, not go to hell. So we have to be very careful of those things, because when you're writing tons and tons and tons of dialogue, these are the terms that just come out almost automatically. You don't even think about it. Another thing we try to avoid are emotional states and player responses. This is another thing that other games do to great effect. For example, the BioWare, the last company that I worked for, did a lot of, you know, where you'll have a snarky answer or a forceful answer. Well, in Elder Scrolls, unless it's speechcraft, intimidation, or persuade, where you'll have some force behind it, and you can have those things, we try to make them very, very neutral. The best types of player responses are things where the player's emotional state, they can sort of project it over them. Like if they're saying, why are you doing that? It could, if they're the player who is role-playing that they are a friendly, well, why are you doing that? Another player might say, why are you doing that? You know, we try and make them neutral and not lead the player, and especially not force the player to do things or say things they wouldn't want to say. Speechcraft is different, because that's optional. You have the option to have the skills to persuade and intimidate and to use those responses. And they're a lot of fun. Another thing we try not to do, which is difficult at times because you want to, the expediency of telling the story, sometimes it's much easier to just blatantly tell the player up front what's happening. And you can give away twists that are going to happen. If you're in a murder mystery and there's only one suspect, well, it's probably that guy that did it, and there's no surprise. So we try and create, well, maybe there's 3 or 4 suspects, and we create reasons for them to be under suspicion. And especially do effective things like, this person appears to be the one, and then they're proved to not be to not be the one, to not be guilty. And then you go off into it, and then, as it turns out, they are the guilty one. So it's sort of a misdirect. And we try and have those moments of surprise, and, you know, for people who are really paying attention to the story. And of course, forcing players to do things they don't want to do, that's huge. It's a difficult thing to do, or a difficult thing not to do. Because again, the expediency of the story, we want the player to go off on this adventure, and obviously they can accept the quest or not, but if they want to do the quest, we want to give them as many options and make it feel like they're the ones driving it. We're not saying you have to do this. We're not giving them forced failure, things like that. Things we try to include in the game. Humor. We love humor. Not pop culture humor, but appropriate Elder Scrolls humor. Characters like Cadwell, like Sheogorath, where they're really fun if they're done right and they're done correctly. And we try and infuse as much of that in, because Tamriel's a pretty bleak place. There's a lot of horrible things going on all the time. And we want to break that up as much as we can. We do a lot of visual storytelling, and this is where we work hand in hand with the content designers. The theater scenes I talked about earlier, and even things like level design and just layouts of things. The scenes from the dead, the tableaus all over the game with the skeletons is a great example of that. We loved that. We try and engage in that as much as possible. Obviously, most of that is done by the level designers, but we're all thinking, what happened here and how can I work this into my story? A lot of times, things the level designers and world builders will lay out will inspire us to create stories. We go in and say, well, this is interesting, maybe I can use this in the story. So it's very much a collaborative effort. Meaningful choices is another big one too. We try to do this as much as possible. It's a difficult thing to do in an MMO because it's an exponential thing. The more choices you give that lead to completely different outcomes, the more content you're creating at any given time that the average player won't see. So we have to be very, very careful with those, and we want to make sure that those are choices that are interesting and have interesting payoffs. And most importantly, compelling characters with unique voices. That's the most important thing. A lot of fantasy games, there's just sort of your average quest giver that, you know, oh, can you help me, my family, you know. We try and create really interesting characters, and there's so much to draw on with the races, the Khajiit voice and the Argonian voice and the Nord voice. There's nothing funner than writing for a Khajiit. They're hilariously fun to write. So that really lends a lot to it. But then also, how do we make them different? One of the things we found with the first person speak that the Khajiit do is not all of them, we decided, not all of them do it. Some of them are more, that live in the cities, that are more, spend more time with other races, may have less of it. They all have a slight accent, but not of them, all of them do the third person. Older Khajiit would tend to do it, more formal Khajiit. Other ones that might, like Raz, who is in a sort of a secret agent for the Queen, might do it sometimes, but when he does it, it's usually because it's part of his personality and his sort of charisma. Other characters don't do it at all that are Khajiit, so it's an interesting thing to do. Another difficult thing to do, speaking of Razandar, is characters that appear all throughout the game. Continuing characters, recurring characters we call them. It's difficult because we have many different teams working with the same characters and many different writers writing for those characters. And we have to track those quirks. We have to track what they are like, so we keep, first off in our internal wiki we have a recurring characters page that says where they appear, what they've done, what they've been through, all of this kind of a thing for our reference. But we also instituted something where we assigned for specific ones, like Razandar, like Queen Iron, like Cadwell, where one of us is assigned to be sort of to oversee, to be the parent of that character. And even though all the different teams will go through and write dialogue, and many of it's terrific and is usable, that one writer will go through and touch all throughout the game everything that character says, so they have a unique voice that is consistent. And that worked for us really, really well, so that was a challenge. So one of the things I thought would be kind of fun to do, I went around and asked our writers, off the top of your head, who's your favorite character? And it's kind of funny because many of them, of course, came up with characters that they worked on. And I don't think it's about, oh, look what a great job I did. It's more about when you're working with these characters for a long time, you fall in love with them. You really do. They start talking for you, and it's a lot of fun. We love when we see feedback on the forums and fan art and things for characters we created. There's nothing like that. So Lawrence picked Razandar, who is also one of my favorites.
Who I didn't write at all.
Yeah, that's true. This is true. That is very true. And Michael Zenke, down the bottom, who actually did write, he was the parent of both Iron and Razandar, so he went through and did a brush on them throughout the game. I had the good fortune, even though I wrote the main quest of the game and created Cadwell, but then Cadwell appears later in the game in the entire Cold Harbor zone, and I didn't write any of that, but I did go through and do a brush to make sure that he was consistent all the way through. And the writers, there were several writers who worked on that who did a great job. I didn't have to change that much, they kind of got it. So that was really fun. Like I said, Michael, Queen Iron. Rebecca Harwick loved Stibbons, Lady Lorent's long-suffering manservant, who we all love, actually. And we get him, we probably will get him into much more trouble in the future as well. Bill Slavosek, like Naryu, who is the, Naryu? Pronunciation, I forget how to, Naryu, that's right. She is the...
Close enough.
Yeah. The assassin. That you meet in Narcissus and continues throughout the game, and again, Bill sort of babysat her dialogue and did a brush on her. Yeah, she was more a Tong character. Zach Bush liked Shia Gorath, and who doesn't like him? He was, I mean, his character was established in previous games, obviously, but it's fun to write. He's just, a mad god version of Shrek. It's just hilarious. And then Rob Chesney liked King Faharajad. And Rob also was the voice of the Bill Nighy character, King Yaroon.
King Emmerich.
Or Emmerich, excuse me, thank you. He rewrote his, I believe it was Bill actually who did the consistency passed on for Faharajad, but they're both wonderful characters. And then Jonathan Toe, who is has written many of our dungeons and trials. Alan Wee, who is the spirit in Crypt of Hearts and Veteran Crypt of Hearts that introduces the quest. And my favorite, Abner Thorne. He was so much fun to write because he's just, sort of the villain that you're forced to work with, and his dripping with sarcasm, the stuff between him, Lyris, and Sai Sahan was some of the most satisfying stuff. We got the 3 actors in the studio at the same time, which almost never happens, and had them playing off each other, and I couldn't have been happier with that. It was just so much fun. So that's my presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence now, tell you some of our lore stuff, and then we'll take some questions after. Thanks.
Hey, Summiteers.
So yeah, I'm Lawrence Schick. I'm the lore master. I share the writing lead with an Underwin. I've been in this business a long time. I have sort of a complementary background to Win's. More hardcore role-playing game all the way back to the late 70s. On early Dungeons and Dragons stuff, I worked with Gary Gygax. Was one of the first paper game designers to go into video games in the early 80s to Coleco. Worked for some years at Microprose, doing both strategy and role-playing type games. Worked with Sid Meier there. Then in the 90s, I went into my management arc and was a producer, executive producer. I was a general manager of all the games at AOL in the late 90s. Then I dropped that out, went back to writing, and my friend Ken Ralston, who I've known for 25 plus years, and is one of my best buds, and who was the lead designer on Morrowind and Oblivion. He dragged me back into game design to work on the game that turned into Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, which was done at Big Huge Games just down the street. Then about 5.5 years ago, I moved up here, initially as a lead content designer, and it's just been the culmination of all the stuff I've done before, and it's this is just the best gig I've ever had. This is great. So, what the heck do I do? Well,
wizard?
yeah,
He is a wizard.
we set out some years ago to build this MMO, this big fantasy MMO, and we could have just taken the route of building a fantasy MMO that had a sort of light dusting of Elder Scrolls on top of it, right? Like Lord of the Rings Monopoly. It's just Monopoly with the names changed. But we decided we didn't want to do that, though that would have been the least risky thing to do. We decided we wanted to build a real, genuine, deep entry in the Elder Scrolls series, regardless of what implications that had for sort of standard MMO organization mechanics. That was a risky thing to do, and there were a lot of people, even internally here at the studio, who thought, yeah, great idea, sure, that's what we'll do, right? But as time went on, and we got deeper and deeper into building an Elder Scrolls MMO, every time something wasn't working right, or something didn't fit, or something didn't play well, we started saying, well, maybe we just need to make it more Elder Scrolls-y. And nearly every time, that was the answer. That gave us the path forward. So that eventually, we were really deep into it, and this was all with the full approval and consultation and help of Bethesda Game Studios. And early on, I sort of took on the main role of consulting with them about lore matters, and because I was working on the main quest and stuff like that, and I sort of gradually grew into this position of being the guy who you went and asked about the Elder Scrolls stuff. We have everybody on staff, everybody on the dev team, is pretty much an Elder Scrolls fan. I mean, when we're interviewing people, that's one of the questions we ask them: are you an Elder Scrolls fan? It's important. The tone, the feel of the game is very particular, and it's not necessarily, it's easy to kind of just deviate from it and go generic, right? And we need to gently steer things back in the direction of Tamriel when they start veering off toward Dungeons and Dragons or something. We've been working very closely with Bethesda all along, but always with the clear understanding that they own this property, they control it. We are a sister studio, we're very cordially working with them, but we defer to them on matters of lore and background. That's over time, I've learned what their hot buttons are, what are the things to stay away from, what they're totally cool with, and they've even started discussing things back and forth with us. So it's grown into a real collegial working relationship. So what is cool about Elder Scrolls? Why do an Elder Scrolls game rather than some other property? The thing that's unique about Elder Scrolls in the fantasy settings is that it has equivocal lore to it. It's not like Middle-earth, it's not like Forgotten Realms or so many other settings of that sort where, you know, like in Middle-earth, for example, you got the Silmarillion, you got the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, you've got all the jillion books that Christopher Tolkien has edited, and they all come from one big lore daddy. And he says, this is the way it was, this is what happened, and, you know, it's all laid out right here. Here's the names, here's what happened to Morgoth. We know exactly what happened to Morgoth, and where Sauron came from, and what he was doing in all those years in between and stuff, because Tolkien said so. Elder Scrolls isn't like that. In the Elder Scrolls, this is one of the great innovations that started coming in around the time of Redguard and Morrowind that really differentiated the series from others. In Elder Scrolls, every bit of lore is delivered from the viewpoint of a character in the game. There's no ex cathedra statements by somebody that, well, you know, it's like this. In Elder Scrolls, things work like this. Bam. Nope. In Elder Scrolls, we have this sage who tells you this is how it works. And we have this person over here who gives you the history of this area. And it's always done through the point of view of the characters in the game. That leads to two things that are really interesting. One is that it leads to useful inconsistencies. Useful in what way? Why is it useful to have inconsistent lore? That sounds crazy. You should just know, what the heck happened there. Well, it's useful because lore that is delivered by an unreliable narrator.
I'm sorry.
Lore that's delivered by an unreliable narrator gives you lore that has two aspects to it that are of interest that are valuable to the player. One is, yeah, he's telling you about what happened when the Akaviri invaded, right? But he's also telling you what he thinks about that and what his culture thinks about that. And so that adds extra nuance and extra flavor that you don't get if stuff is just handed down from on high. It's a different paradigm from Tolkien. It's really a paradigm that comes from H.P. Lovecraft and from his development of the Cthulhu mythos, in which everything is told from characters who are in terrible circumstances, and some of them are mad. So there's really unreliable and inconsistent information there, and it's great. So Nirn is also unique because it's a world of both reason and myth, and these two polar opposite things provide a really interesting tension inside the game and the way you're telling the tale. In a standard fantasy game, it's a medieval setting and you got wizards and they do magic, right? And that's about all the background you need. There's some gods. They give the priests spells and stuff. In Nirn, you've got a world that is really based on mythological background that is drawn from our own history in such a way that you've got creation myths that that explain the nature of reality. It's not just Earth with some magic guys casting spells, right? The nature of reality is fundamentally different in the world of Nirn because it's based. All the natural laws come from the sacrifices that the Aedra made when they made the world. And so Akatosh, when he put himself into the world, he made time happen, right? And so forth and so on with all the different gods. So you've got this really seriously interesting mythological background about the nature of reality and how it was created and how it can be changed because it's not set forever. It can be further changed by those who can channel magicka and force their will upon it, right? That's what magic is. You're changing reality locally. Sometimes locally, usually temporarily, but you're changing reality. And creatures and characters and beings of mythological levels can change reality in big ways. And that's what happens when you get a dragon break, or a plane meld, or an oblivion crisis, or Alduin coming back from the depths of time. You've got reality changing in big ways. At the same time, you've got all of these people who, unlike in your sort of standard medieval setting, they look at things in a very logical and scientific and organized fashion. You got all these sages, you got the Mages Guild researchers, you've got the scholars, and they're all breaking stuff down, and it gives us a way to convey lore in a way that is comfortable for 21st century Western players, because it's couched in terms that are familiar to them, but at the same time, they disagree with each other. And so that makes for interesting tensions between the different cultures and the different ways of looking at things, and it gives a way for us to carry nuance across. And the hero, who's the standard character in all the Elder Scrolls games, is of course one of these mythical focuses, so that's why big important stuff happens around him. So, how do we balance these things out? This first quote here is a paraphrase of something Todd Howard told us. You have to make the world seem as credible and as solid as possible when you've got all this weird shit going on. Because otherwise it's not attached to anything and it just feels weird, right? But if it's attached to real people in a real world where they're really living and doing stuff and making things and then being threatened by amazing supernatural forces, then it matters. Then you can tell human stories within fantastic situations, and it's not just Thundar the Barbarian. Apologies to anybody who's a Thundar the Barbarian fan. So when you're walking around a town, we do our absolute best to make sure that you are talking to people who, this guy, he's working his forge, he's making a plow. For that guy over there who grows pumpkins, pumpkins, of course, are one of the staples of Tamrielic nutrition. But we try to make them as real as possible, and I'm really excited about the oncoming implementation of the justice system, because we'll be going back in and making the world even richer and more interesting and adding more layers of this kind of stuff. I get much more excited about doing the lore of the cultures and the societies than I do about doing the high-level stuff with the Daedric princes and the gods. That stuff is great. I love that shit. I can do that stuff all day. But what's really fun is going in and figuring out, how does an Argonian village work? That's the fun for me. So, how do we deliver all this lore? Because, goddammit, there's a lot of it, and we're making more of it all the time. So, as Wynn alluded to, when we're getting you into a new activity, such as a quest or a POI or a new area you haven't been to before, we just give you enough for context, just to get you going, so that you can get into it, so that you can tell who's who, and start unraveling things. And then beyond that, everything else is opt-in. It's all up to how much does the player want to find out. They can talk to people, they can talk to the quest-involved people, and ask them questions and get more information. They can talk to those guys who are standing over there, who aren't involved in the quest, and don't have anything important to convey related to the quest, but tell you more about the context of the area, may tell you more about the people who are involved in the quest, give you more deep background. You can read books. By God, we put books everywhere. We love them. You can listen to bard songs. You can talk to merchants. They will often have something contextual to tell you besides just, what do you want? The lore books are one of the things I'm responsible for. It's a hallmark of the series, so we knew we needed to have a bunch of them. I told them early on. They said, okay, this is like 4 years ago. They said, make an estimate of how many new books you're going to have in the game. And I sat and I thought about it and I made some notes and stuff, and I said, oh, about 1,500. And they said, ha, you're out of your mind. You get 200. So we ended up with 2,000. And this is in addition to selecting classics from previous Elder Scrolls installments that we felt we needed to have, because they're foundational lore books that tell you about the background of the setting in classic ways, or because they're just so cool we couldn't leave them out. Like the Lusty Argonian Maid, we couldn't deny that to our players, even though it was written 800 years after our game. So
That adaptation was
that is right. So we figured out that it's actually an oral tradition that pervades through Tamrielic society, and so it's been around for a very long time. And that guy Crassius Curio in Morrowind, who claimed to have written it, was just doing the latest version, the latest
We need to
translation.
write a book about him, about how he was wrong. He claimed it.
But he's in the. But no, never mind.
You're right.
And the thing is, most of these new books are telling about. I mean, a lot of them are quest-related books, right? So they're just you bastard, I'm going to get you for this, and here's the incentive for why I did this terrible thing. But also a lot of them just tell about just cast some more light on the information on where you happen to be in this great big world of Tamriel, and what they think about here and how they do stuff. And then we included a sprinkling of really insane deep lore volumes for the serious lore hounds that mostly I wrote that are a ton of fun to write. But you have to step carefully because you're carving channels in the high level lore of a game that has a big fat history behind it, and the lore hounds take it very seriously, as well they should. Me being one of them.
Lawrence has a wonderful habit of going through and writing not just one book about this topic, but three from three different authors, all of which contradict each other.
I like my dueling sages. Often, because this game is, I think, the biggest and most complicated single piece of entertainment in the history of the planet. We're trying to do so many things at once, right? So all the time, we'll be coming up with new systems, new approaches, new twists on systems, ways to do things in an MMO fashion that are very different from what's been done with single-player games. And so people will figure out how they want it to work, and then they go, whoa, wait a minute, this is different, and we're trying to be Elder Scrollsy. So they'll come to me and say, well, Lawrence, this is what we want to do. Is this okay? Can we do this in the Elder Scrolls? And it's not my job to say, no, sorry, that's not Elder Scrolls. We don't do that. Sorry, go back to the drawing board. It's my job to say, absolutely, this sounds like fun. Here, it's going to be great for an MMO. Here's how we do it in an Elder Scrolls context. And then we just we tweak it a little bit, or they go ahead and implement it. I make sure that all the names and everything are appropriate for the lore and the setting and the culture, and then I explain it in character dialogue or in lore books or something like that. It was one of the axioms I learned from Sid Meier when I was working at Microprose in the 80s, which was at the time known mainly for military simulations. And he did some of those, like Silent Service and some very famous ones. And his game design axiom was, when you're making a game that is a simulation game, then you figure out where the fun is, you make that game, and then you figure out what it's a simulation of. The way we apply that here is we make the game, we make it fun, and then we figure out why this is actually exactly an extension of previous Elder Scrolls lore and makes perfect sense within the system, within the history. So ultimately, gameplay always wins because it should, because it's a game, and it has to be fun before all. But we always get the last word to explain it.
See what he did there?
Yep. Because that's the end. So now we'll take your questions. Do you want?
I'm sure we'll both field them. He'll take the lore question.
Yes, down front.
How do you feel about some players taking like the Argonian name style and they start applying it to the Khajiits? Do you? try to
feel they should be flogged.
well, do you try to, from a lore standpoint, push them to let them know that this isn't a typical cat name or?
No, absolutely not. You know, we there's plenty of examples of Khajiit names and Argonian names and stuff like
As
that.
well as Butt Bunch Turdburger.
And so people can follow if they want, right?
I mean, you don't have control over them, but
No, we don't. We don't have control over that.
We did spend a lot of time with the UI people, though, making sure that if you wanted to have a correct name, you could have it.
Right. So that you could have the sufficient number of hyphens in your name to do that, so that if you were an orc, man, they went crazy when I told them that they had to suppress the capitalization of G on Gro and Gra apostrophe, so for on orcish names. They were like, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that for months, and then they had to do it. So we provide you the ability to be lore correct, but it's opt-in. As all things with lore, you make your own decisions.
We have enough time to try and think ourselves.
What if you wanted to roleplay an Argonian because raised by Khajiit?
Then you
There
do.
you go.
What if this one wanted to role play an Argonian? Lizard raised by cat.
So my hand's going to be up a bunch of times, but first, this two-part question. One, could you record an album reading bedtime stories for me so I can sleep better? Two, with something like Sheogorath, that has a split personality where he's actually an Aedra and a Daedra at the same time, how much control do you have of being able to bring that into the story? Are you allowed to touch that at all? Is that something that they're like, stay away from, or we're going to put up a barbed wire fence?
We wouldn't want to explain that. We would want to.
But could you bring it into the actual story if you wanted to?
Somewhat. If I had an idea to do that, I would say to Lawrence, is this possible? Will BGS have a problem with this? And he would check it, because he's obviously a character that, like any of the Daedra Princes, we have to really be careful around them. We can't say this is what this is.
He is my favorite character, and I think he's phenomenally well written. And the guy who voice acted him should get everyone else's voice acting pay given to him, because he was amazing.
He is great.
And Wynn wrote most of his lines. Did you?
Well, I did a first pass on it, and then Michael Zenke went and added some really great stuff too. So it's always a group effort.
Well
You
done.
can't really have much ownership on it. Even Main Quest, I wrote. I did the fiction pass on the entirety of it, but some of the best lines came from the content designers. So it's really a collaborative effort.
Yes.
Well, I was reading some forum posts, and somebody brought up that the Elder Scroll really didn't have that much, effect on the main quest like in all the other games. So, for the continuation of the main quest, is there going to be more emphasis on the mysteries of the Elder Scroll? I notice they're all in Cyrodiil right now.
Yeah, we can't. Well, in Cyrodiil, it's a gameplay element. That's the thing where gameplay trumps lore in that way, and we try and make it work as best it can. Part of the thing and part of the fun, I think, of the Elder Scrolls is that technically, we talked about this a lot in the second chapter of the main quest, is they are constantly being rewritten by human actions. And which is a wonderful thing when you need to retcon something like Cyrodiil is a jungle, that we can actually go through and say, what we do affects them. And you can't even study them long enough to find the real truth, because you'll go blind and mad. So it's really like the ultimate MacGuffin for the whole world, where, if you know about a MacGuffin, but the thing that everybody wants within a story, it was an Alfred Hitchcock term. And because it can affect our plot, and we can use it to forgive a multitude of sins and change things as we go. So, yeah. I don't know if did I answer your question? I can't really talk about the future of the main story, but.
Someone else went ahead and stole my sort of joke question for you.
Oh,
I was
man.
going to ask if you could DM my next Pathfinder campaign. But I guess one thing I wanted to ask, in terms of writing, was the goal to include meaningful choices. And I think that the game has some really well implemented examples of that. But I think that also for some choices in the game, one frustration I had was that a lot of times the choice you get comes at the end of the story arc.
Right.
And so you go through all this work, and then at the end of the story arc you get to choose, like, you know, is she going to be the queen or is he going to be the king, or you know, do you destroy the artifact or let it stay, or
Part of that is what I talked about when choice is a really difficult thing to do well because it gets exponentially greater.
Sure.
If you had a choice at the very beginning of the quest, it would essentially be 2 quests, and then half of
Yeah.
the people wouldn't see part of the content. And when you're creating a game this big with as much content, the last game I worked on was Star Wars: The Old Republic, which, as you know, BioWare has an incredible depth of choice. That's their whole style of writing, and the nightmare of testing that and making sure if anybody's played through that, the main quest, the class quests in that, there was a critical path through those, that if at any point the game broke, you could not advance in the game. The game was over for you as a player. And when you're releasing a game of this scope and this magnitude,
Yeah.
it's you just can't risk that. You can't risk.
I fully appreciate that, but to a certain extent, isn't that what makes the choice meaningful? Is having it early enough that it does have that kind of consequence? Because at the end of, you know, like, right before I leave the zone, I make this choice, and then I never return. I don't feel the choice.
Right. Well, one way we try to mitigate that is what Wynn was talking about is through recurring characters.
Yeah.
And recurring characters will appear in later zones in the storyline, and then they will react to you, or even appear or not appear, depending upon what choices you've made
Based
earlier.
on it, with
that's a
the
good
stone, was the family in Bleak Rock that
Yeah.
you could make the choice as to who to save and everything. Those characters continue to show up through the game and will react to you based on what you did, and one of them becomes a major character in the Rift. That's very true. So we have to track those variables throughout the game and know this is what the player chose, and it's a difficult thing to do because those variables, what
Yeah.
you did, in our case, it's done with quest endings. In BioWare does it with global variables, and towards the end of the game, the amount of variables you're carrying, even on something like the Mass Effect trilogy,
Yeah.
you're tracking all the way through that. In Star Wars, there was a massive, huge amount, probably as much as the Mass Effect trilogy, and that we had to continue to track because we were planning on adding new content. But what happened, because we did so many choices and created so much gameplay that your average player wouldn't see, people burn through the game too quickly.
So, and an issue we love doing that business with recurring characters, but we can only do a certain amount of it. For one thing, it's really hard to test because the game doesn't get tested holistically very much, right? This part gets tested, and then different people test this part, and different people test this part, and they don't necessarily know that they're supposed to be looking out for these recurring characters and making sure they're implemented properly.
Yeah.
So we're still squashing bugs related to those, I'm pretty sure by update 5 that we've got them all. But yeah, it's something that is very labor intensive, and you're absolutely right. It makes the game matter, and so we do it as much as we can. We'll try to do it even more in the future because recurring characters are our favorite thing.
Did you
Your turn again.
Because you put your hand up a minute ago.
Yeah, you can go first. That's fine.
With the player dialogue responses, I noticed when I read it, there was a very neutral tone given to it in a subtle way. Was that done consciously with the thought that the player doesn't have a soul?
No.
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 It's a standard in Elder Scrolls games, actually. And when I came in, probably because I had just come from BioWare, there was 2 things I said. It would be really cool if we could do these things. And it was unequivocally told no. One was emotional content and player responses, because it's not done unless it's speechcraft, and I mentioned that earlier. The other one was, for instance, in a BioWare game, you could be talking to one character and there could be another NPC that joins in the middle of the conversation, so you have 3-way conversations. Doesn't happen in Elder Scrolls. You talk to one person. When you exit the conversation, theater happens based on the result of your conversation, and that's the way. That's a tradition, and we didn't want to deviate from that. We didn't want to say, "Oh, this is a better way to do it," because everybody loves Elder Scrolls games, and there's a certain magic to those things, and we wanted those expectations to be fulfilled.
Yes, as you said, it's intended to make meaningful choices in the game. And I think, could it be possible to employ a karma system, like you're getting good points or bad points for one choice, and your character is a little more shining or
Dark side and
get
light side
darker.
force.
Yeah, yeah. There was something like that in the Fallout games. We early on, we considered that. And we decided that given the tone of moral ambiguity that you find in the Elder Scrolls titles in the single-player games, where you can make whatever choice you want, and then you can choose to be a paladin this time, you can choose to be a total rat bastard the next time in a different location, and it's entirely within the player's purview to make those choices.
It's not always a light side and a dark side choice either. Sometimes it's a bad choice and a worse choice.
Right.
There's a lot of bleakness to it.
And so we decided that to be Elder Scrolls-y, that we wanted to retain that, because when you have a karma system, you are reinforcing what choices the player makes, so that the more they make this choice, the more they make this choice. And what that does is, it means that those choices over there start to dwindle and disappear. So that over time, characters like in the Fable games, right, they tend to go one pole or the other. You have to work really hard to stay in the middle in a game that has that kind of system. And we didn't see the value of it. So we entertained that thought, but then we decided that we would leave every choice up to the players every time. Yes?
Should players be on the lookout for Easter eggs inside the game?
No.
Elder Scrolls appropriate Easter eggs.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. We tried to police. You can't police whether somebody uses their friend's name. There's just no way to tell. We tell people over and over again, and like I said, I look for those things that are obviously out of place. And Lawrence is also looking at anachronisms, especially. So we try to do most of them. I mean, this game series, the franchise, has such a great, rich history that we have plenty of Easter eggs that are just Elder Scrolls Easter eggs. Mike the Liar showing things like that are Sheogorath showing, those things that you just, oh wow, this is great. It reminds me of Morrowind, or it reminds me of Daggerfall, or so appropriate ones. And there are. I mean, there's a lot of little bits of humor that we've put in the things that we've tried to do. The one thing that I like that we did add recently was I think it was a Kotaku article where it was The Onion did a thing with the NPC who was guarding his barrel, and we actually went and put that item in the barrel. Oh, actually, I think we put a note in the barrel saying that I found this here, referencing the Onion article. But it was completely appropriate within the world. It wasn't glaringly anachronistic or.
Yeah, the Easter eggs we try to put in are contextual Easter eggs, right? So that this guy here will refer to something that guy said way the hell over there, and you may never get it. Most people may never get it, but if people who get it will say, "Oh yeah, I know what that means. That refers to that guy over there." So that's those may be more effort than they're worth, really. But yeah, we do this. Yes. You.
One question I had about recurring characters, because there's one thing you mentioned earlier that's so great. You guys were lucky enough to work with some really outstanding actors and actresses on the game, and for the release version of the game, this was really awesome. How easy is it for you to bring back characters? Given
That's a good question. Well, those roles are called stunt casting generally, and it's a great thing. It's great publicity. People who are fans of these actors who might not otherwise see news about the game see this, and they're also fabulous actors. Getting John Cleese was like the highlight of my career, because we didn't have a character for him. We found out that he was available, and we created one for him. I created one for him, and I memorized every line the guy's ever said in his life. An old Monty Python fan. But potentially we could. There are many we would like to bring back. Some of actually our main cast aren't really stunt cast. They're sort of upper level people like Jennifer Hale and
Yeah.
Kevin Michael Richardson, who aren't like Bill Nye is tough, Dumbledore is tough. Alfred Molina is tough, but I would get him back because he was awesome.
Yeah.
But we would like to. And there are also, without getting spoilery, there are chances that some of these characters might not be around anymore. And we want, if we did bring them back, we would want them to be available to everybody. So we'll see. We've talked about it. There are many we would like to.
Sure.
Yes.
Will we see any more a story based around the tribunal in the future? For me personally, that's a story that's really intrigued me, and I loved seeing, Almalexia in the Ebonheart Pact storyline. Will we see any more of that type of thing in the future?
I can't tell you that we will.
Yeah.
That would be spoilery. I can't talk about that.
Can't say that.
Sounds good.
But that would be really cool.
Yes.
Can we expect something like a dungeon companion for your dungeons? What is the story of the bosses? Why is this dungeon there?
We try to do that with lore books as much as we can. Dropping them in. Part of the problem with dungeons is you're with your group and everybody's in a big hurry and nobody wants to stop while you read a book. But there are lore books throughout that we do that as much as possible,
For the
and we're
bosses,
constantly adding.
so we can get the story of what this boss and this boss and the veteran.
We try to, and we're constantly adding them because we don't need VO for them. So it's really easy to just write a few more books and add them to the
Maybe if
game.
you find like NPCs or something in there, they walk with your group, but they're like talking while you're walking, kind of thing.
We try to. That gets tough, especially because if you have a group dungeon, you need a lot of enemies, and it can be a frame rate killer. Everybody's got spell effects going off, and the enemies are fighting and stuff, and every single additional person that you add. So those tend to be.
Can't be worse than PvP.
Yeah, 1 to 4. 4-player dungeons or single player. And actually, I would actually brings up an interesting point that I've been wanting to ask you guys to see what you think. Some of our content, obviously, the main quest and the guilds, were intentionally done as single-player instances because we can do storytelling. You would never be able to go to Sancretor with 3 of the companions with you, all talking back and forth and being with them if we had a multiplayer experience there, because we would have had to have 4 times as many spawns, and it would have been a nightmare. Does that, in a multiplayer game, that was a choice we made, but we're starting to think in future content, do we want to make this, you can go with your friend, or do we want to have them 4-person? Is the single player chapters of the story frustrating to somebody that plays a multiplayer game?
No.
I get a lot of resistance from it, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah, and I run a casual community, mostly elderly,
Yeah.
and there are people that cannot progress. Like, we've tried it
by
hundreds of
themselves?
times. Yeah, by
Ah.
themselves. They cannot progress it to save
Oh,
their
that's
life.
interesting. Huh.
But from a storyline aspect, if you take it away and make it a group atmosphere, you no longer feel like the hero. And that really kills
was
your
our
immersion in
point.
the
Yep.
game.
It would be kind of nice if they can basically hire a friend to be a henchman to come along with them for their story.
And that's something we've talked about too, we'd love to do
Because
something.
it would be nice to be able to go in and help this lady out. I mean, it gets so frustrated, and
Yeah.
she's like, "This is like the 150th time I try this, and I always die." And it's like, yeah, you need to learn how to dodge.
Yeah.
But you can't harp
I love
on
that
a.
she's
on
like,
a
how old is she?
She's 75.
I love her. That's fantastic.
So,
Oh my
but you
God.
can't harp on a
My
75-year-old.
mom still doesn't know what I do for a living.
Right. So.
I'm sorry, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to
Yeah.
get in his idea, because in the Old Republic it was possible to take someone with you in the instance, but it was still only your instance, and he didn't make any progress. He also had to do it later,
Yeah.
but he was able to help you, so you wouldn't have the problem that there are 6 or 9 or 12 characters with you.
Yeah.
It's still just Titanborn, Edna, and Sahan.
Yeah.
One time, everyone, but the other player could help you, and I think this
Yeah.
would really help a lot of solo players
Yeah,
in the game.
we've talked about that for sure. I would even love to see something similar to them, even if it's your quest. Say you're the person who it's your version of the quest, and you come up and you talk to them. At Star Wars, we had a thing where if you
Yes.
were in group, the conversation wouldn't start playing unless the other person came up and was within distance. But we could do it. We wouldn't never have the group conversation thing. That wouldn't work with our game because our characters aren't voiced. But we could do something like their dialogue options are grayed out, but they
Yeah.
get to see the conversation and
Yes.
all of that.
That'd
I
be
like
perfect.
that idea a lot. It's something we've discussed. but
That'd be perfect.
we'll see.
It'd give us a way to
Yeah.
put training wheels on them.
Yeah, exactly. Great. That's great feedback. Thanks.
You can go first. I've already
Okay.
asked a couple.
If you started writing about boats, would they have to make them and put them in the game?
We have boats.
So it's like the never-ending story. You just-
We,
You're
this is
mistaking the tail for the dog.
exactly.
It's you mean actual physical moving
There's a
boats
lot of
in the
people
game?
that would like some boats
yeah,
in
that
the game.
technology, it's what's called MAGs. It's moving platforms. For things like elevators and it's very expensive and very difficult to do. And I don't know if it gives us enough bang for the buck. We'd rather, justice system is a huge effort for our department too, because every character in the game has to respond to justice system now. So everybody needs lines on them. So that's a huge amount of stuff. To go and put the technological expertise into that where, I don't know that it would be a big enough payoff, but I would like to see it. And it's certainly possible in the future, but I don't think in the near term it's probably going to happen.
Okay.
In regards to creative control, with a character like Cadwell that was very well written, very well acted, that you guys created from scratch, does Bethesda come in at any point and say, this is ours, we control what happens from here on, or is it just open to you to do whatever you want to do?
It's their prerogative. They're entitled to do whatever they want with the property.
But I'll tell
And the
you, we
characters.
love Bethesda games, and I would love for them to take our characters and
Yeah.
do something in the future, because their games take place hundreds of years in the future.
But they wouldn't limit your storyline with it as long as it was within the lore of the actual world itself?
They could if they wanted to, but they haven't shown any interest in it. I mean, here's the thing about creative control with the capital C's, right? Which is that for people like us who've worked in this business since the dawn of time, it's all about collaboration. We don't own these characters, Even the people who have the voice of the character or in charge of the voice of the character, they know very well that this is we all make this game. Hundreds of people made this game. So when somebody steps up and says, "Yeah, well, you can't mess with this because I made that and that's my thing," you show them the door.
That's true, and it's fun when you're when you're getting stuff from another writer that you're doing a pass on. When you find great stuff, you don't have to change. I wrote a lot of Cadwell's funny lines, but "Victory, thy name is Cadwell" was Bill Slavicsak's, and I love that line. He did some great stuff on it, and the other content designers on that team just put in some great stuff. So yeah, I may tweak it a little bit. They hadn't saying what too much to me. It didn't sound John Cleese to me. So
Just one more thing about creative control and collaboration. Okay, when you're a game designer, if you're really thinking about what you're doing, the really serious game designers are always thinking about the fact that your collaborator is, in addition to you're working with 2, 3, 50, 200 other people to make the game, your ultimate collaborators are the thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of players who play with the game, right? And their choices, their decisions make the ultimate experience that occurs. And in a multiplayer game, they're collaborating with all the other people who are making those decisions too, right? So you really have to be open and feel like I am making stuff for everybody else to have fun with, right? I am giving them the potential to go and do cool things, and it's theirs. It's not mine, it's everybody's. So that's it.
if I could add to that, having worked 10 years in film and TV, where I went to my cave and I wrote, and I came back and they said, "We like this, we don't like this," and I go back and I did, it was not a collaborative process. They would give me bad notes and I would try and make them not so bad and turn in my next draft, and it was once I started working in the game industry, I never looked back for a second. Everybody has this, it would be great to be a screenwriter, and I have many friends who are writing for film and TV that I've had for decades, and many of them are successful, and very little of their stuff gets made, and it's always frustrating. I wouldn't go back. You could probably pay me to go back, but it'd be a lot.
I could go on and on about the whole genre's roots in tabletop, but I'll spare you. Yes?
So I have a I'm definitely coming from an MMO background, although I've enjoyed all the Elder Scrolls titles before. One thing that I kind of miss as a player in ESO is the feeling that the world at times is much larger than myself. And that may be at odds sometimes with trying to always paint you as the hero, but I sometimes like feeling like I'm part of something bigger. And I feel like in ESO there's not a lot of characters that are presented as being more powerful than the player. There's not sort of like legends of the world that, you know, exist as forces that, like, I'm not really afraid or in awe of anyone I meet. And in other games you might, I guess like in D&D you might think of like an Elminster or Warcraft like a Grom Hellscream, or even in the Elder Scrolls franchise itself like a Dive Fear or something. You know, there's these sort of legendary characters that's like, whoa, you know, this guy is like a real badass.
They do appear throughout the game. A lot of the ones that are legendary heroes are not, they're not hostile. We've had a few cases, like in the main quest at one point you go into a Redguard tomb and you fight some of the classic sword singers that are brought back.
Yeah, but they're very beatable though. They're like weak, and I mean like
Well,
Sai Sahan seems like a total badass. Like
what you're saying there though is gameplay and combat, which is a very, very different thing than what we do. So and I can agree with you in some ways and stuff, and it's part of what the combat and balance team is about working on. But from our point of view, we try to make them sound as badass as possible and as cool as possible. But you know, their toughness within the game that's kind of not above our pay grade.
Maybe for like the hero, that if you're gonna have that sense of awe about someone, it's probably best that you don't ever actually fight them, because that it's sort of at odds with having gameplay be fun and having that lore.
We did do that with Vanis Galarian.
Yeah.
And
that's a good example.
And we put off actually coming to face with Mannimarco as long as we could.
Yeah.
But you got to beat him.
Yes.
But we you know, arguably, you know, you're right, especially in a game that has an alliance war, in which you should have larger than life figures who are directing this war and stuff. But it's you know, there are other players who say who bristle when they encounter a character who is fundamentally more powerful and more badass than they are, and it's like, you know, I'm supposed to be the hero of this goddamn game. Who's this asshole? I want his helmet. Why can't I kill him and take his helmet? You know, so we have to balance this.
We did try and do that, like Queen Iron, who all of us really liked. This sort of, you know, the young elf among the elves who are hundreds of years old, who's really cool and really experienced for her really short years. And she was a really cool character, and in Tanzilwell, she actually joins you. You go with her into the underground there and fight with her. And she's running off ahead of you to fight things before you can even get there. So we did try and do some of that, but we also don't want to take agency away from the player. We do want the player to feel like the hero of his own story. So I think it's a fine line to walk. You're right, though. I agree with, you know, from a dramatic standpoint, it gives you something to aspire to.
So going on to the Mannimarco thing, that just reminded me of when I can't remember where you are, but he's lying there being tortured by Moab Ball's minions and stuff, and you have an option to let him rot in hell, or
release him.
Or release him, and the one thing, the beef I have with this is kind of, it didn't make a difference, really, if you left him there.
Here's the thing, there were certain characters like Mannimarco who appears in later Elder Scrolls games that have already been released but that take place in the future of our game. So we couldn't, whether you released him or somebody else released him, somebody released him because he's in the future games. So we had to make sure that we spent a lot of time looking, and we find it very clever when we can do that behind the scenes, sort of set it up so that no matter what happens, these characters will be in the right position to continue the events that happen in Morrowind or in Oblivion. Where we sort of foreshadow those things, so that if you happen to play them in that order, or you really know those games well, you might go, oh, wow, so this is the guy who eventually does that, or was the guy they talked about in this, and we're trying to do that more and more as we go on for future planning. I wish I could talk more about it.
Yeah, that's why, because I saw that as the main storyline, one of the most important choices you have for forgiving someone, you know.
Yeah.
I was hoping you guys would put a little, I don't know how you can do it, I'm not a writer, but more weight on that decision because I like to forgive is human.
It's also a situation where he has been he has betrayed his master Molag Bal. So to an extent, Molag Bal is going to gets more votes than you on what's going to happen to Mannimarco. And there's it's nothing good. It's just but yeah, Wynn's absolutely right. We know what happens to him in the future, and so we have to set that up, and we can't either redeem him or kill him permanently.
That was a good. That is really good feedback. The thing was, that was the end of his story. So it would have to be done through a long, protracted conversation with him, which at that point in the story, we thought kind of broke the action. At that point, everybody's ready to go stop the flame meld and kill Molag Bal, or defeat Molag Bal, because you can't kill a Daedric prince, ever.
Well, it's because I was took by surprise. It was cool that
Yeah.
I was given even the opportunity to forgive this man who has been curb stomping me the whole game.
Well, I don't know if you noticed, the cells along the side of that
Yeah,
room
I-
contain other characters, and depending on who you defeated or saved, different characters showed up in those, and all of them you could go do it too. It was kind of a little Easter eggy kind of a thing. It wasn't originally part of the storyline for that, but we were like, wouldn't it be cool if we put this in? So we ended up doing it.
So one of the things I noticed, just playing through the story, was that the theme of like these aliens or these Yakutans was a lot more present in ESO than in previous games. I guess my question is like, how did you guys choose to incorporate those groups of people in this game versus possibly others, or maybe even just revealing more information about Argonians or whatever?
Which we will do that.
Yeah, I just thought that was very interesting. I wanted to hear your thoughts.
It's because of our strange situation of being a prequel sequel it's easier for us to reach into the past, the times before ESO, and talk about what has happened with the ancient Yakutans and reveal more secrets about the Ayleids and stuff like that, because it doesn't box Bethesda Game Studios into any particular limits in the future on whatever they want to do with the single-player games. So that's one reason why Craglorn is all about things that happened way in the past, and so is a lot of the Aldmeri Dominion stuff. It's just it leaves more options open for the series. It's just people really like getting more intimations about this very long, deep history that the Elder Scrolls have.
Well, I also in previous installments, Skyrim is all Cyrodiil. It's just one small section. We cover all of the ground of all the previous games and then some. So we have big areas. There's a huge Redguard area, several zones that cover them, and there's all this history and stuff that we want to. So we have the time, and we quite frankly need the topics to create all this content. There's way more than in any previous single game has ever done. So we end up doing that. We look through, Bethesda has a lore wiki. We look through the online stuff because there's great stuff there too. And look for little germs, little seeds of stories that we can sort of get into and tell more about it and explore those things. A lot of the Argonian, even in our game, I think we have explored more of the Argonian stuff with the histories and the hatching pools and all of that. Than we've never seen that stuff in previous Elder Scrolls games, and we have more coming, a lot more. I would like to do more Khajiit as well because I love those guys.
Yes.
In your game, there's much exploration, and if you talk with NPCs or find a book, and in the book there is a reference to the POE, to the point of interest, then you see it on the map, and you can go there, and you can exploration do without books and without NPCs, and you find it also. It's an idea, but if I speak to an NPC or find a book, and this would reveal something that I not can find if I go through the
then it will be something that will be locked?
So, yes.
Yeah, well, those kind of, just from a technical standard, those kind of permissions, can I enter this door or not, are based on the quest state that you're in. So what we would need to do would be to actually push a quest to you through it, and we have talked about doing that.
Yeah. So I would find a book, and there would as information beyond the waterfall, there you can find, and I can find it. There is a wall, and I can find it.
There are actually some
without-
circumstances of that happening. Generally, it's the book as an object in the world is an interactable object that serves as a quest giver, and you bring it up. The problem is we like the book interface with the parchment and everything. Generally, you get the conversation interface with that, so it's a little less. We usually do it with like a note or or an object like that, where the text has the description. We're talking about the possibility of actually bestowing quests using the book interface, which I would love to do. I think that would be great.
Yeah, we need to get some extra tech
Yeah,
for that.
we need some extra tech, and we have so many things, especially, like I said, again, Justice System is so much new tech that's gonna hit every area of the game, and that's really our focus right now. And I think you guys will appreciate it.
But speaking of Justice System, there will be some things you'll be hearing about later today called bandit dens, that if you're an enforcer, that you can only get to by doing enforcer stuff. And they're not available to anybody who hasn't...
We can't give away other people's spoilers.
Yep. Sorry.
They'll come in and they'll be like, we already heard about this.
Yes.
Could you tell us more about the process of creation? Because as every writer knows, it's very important to keep pace in a story, and it's a very difficult thing to do. And not all media types translate over, so screenplays don't exactly translate into gaming, so as they don't translate into literature. How, coming from such a varied background as you both come from, how do you kind of keep track of that and keep that pace going to fit it into the whole cinematic and action feel of the game?
It's a very big deal for me as somebody who came from a different field coming into it, and it's a lot of, I don't know if any of you guys saw our Twitch live stream, but I talked about this a little bit in that. The most important thing as a writer, and obviously as a designer, but as a writer, if you're coming in from another medium, is you have to be a game player. You have to know what the medium is about and how it works, because it's very, very different. There's also the difference between writing text that is meant to be read, like World of Warcraft dialogue, or that is meant to be VO'd by an actor, because there's a very different cadence to it. People, if you're reading and you read an incomplete sentence, it feels awkward. But people don't talk in complete sentences. They talk in sentence fragments, they trail off, they say, all of those things. That there's an art to doing that, and that's about hiring really good writers. I think we got really, really lucky. And early on, when I came on, our writing team was half the size. We doubled it in the first 3 months I was here, and just got some really good people. It didn't hurt that I came off of Star Wars, and they had trimmed some of their staff, and they grabbed some of their best people, so that was a really good thing. But yeah, there's definitely challenges to doing that. It is a very different medium, and even from the point of view like a first-person shooter versus an online RPG, and single player versus multiplayer, they all have different challenges. It's a difficult thing to do. One of the biggest challenges in our game, because when you're writing single, we call them SATs or BARCs, that are the lines that are recorded that when theater is happening between two NPCs, they're saying them. Those actors are very seldom in the same room when they're doing them, and they're doing tons of lines and reading them. So it's really important to have those lines, to take the time to write a line and also give notes about how it should be delivered, so that when all of that is assembled together, it sounds like a natural conversation, and it's exciting, and it tells a story. And it's difficult to do. Sometimes they come back and the actor's reading of that line, because they recorded one line in the middle of it, an hour away from when they recorded the 4 other lines in that dialogue, doesn't sound right. The balance is off, and we have to do pickups, and they have to go in and re-record them, and so it's a real challenge. And like I said, the tendency with writing little bursts of dialogue that are going to, the game tools are going to pull from an action list and say, play this line on this NPC, play this line on this NPC, have this guy walk here, play this line on this NPC. All of those timings, when you're doing them as a writer, you have a little block. You don't have a script. You're not seeing the whole thing. You have to write the lines individually, and there's a tendency to just kind of burn through them and do them quickly because it's not as much fun. But you can't do that, because those dramatic, for the people who do pay attention to the theater, that's where the game comes alive. When you come out of that conversation and stuff starts happening around you, and you see this going on and you feel like you're there, it's critical. So we really have to pay attention to all of that stuff. It's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenge.
And I think you were alluding to, when you're writing in other media, you really try to build up a head of steam and get your head into the space where it's one of the functions that Win and I serve here is that when our writers get stuck, when they get off track, when they're just unsure of themselves, they'll come and ask us. Our door is always open, and you know, we never get to build up a head of steam on anything because we've got writers and content designers coming in through the door all day long saying, can we do this, and well, how do we do that, and I was thinking about this, and what do you think of this character? And so it's up to us to kind of nudge them on and keep them moving and
focused, stay on target.
Yes, and in ESO we can be a vampire or a werewolf. So can we expect in the future to be a zombie or werefish or something?
Interesting.
Would you like that?
Yes, slaughterfish. Yes.
A zombie.
You want to be? That's the first I've heard anybody express that interest, actually. I want to be a were slaughterfish.
Land sharks.
We'll take that under advisement. The zombies and the werewolves are being those things. Those are things that have been traditionally possible in the single-player games. That doesn't mean that we can't add other things, but those were base things that we knew we had to have. But beyond that, it's interesting to think about. What to think about that? Make a note. Yes.
So gameplay comes first, and then you guys fill in the pieces to make the story compelling. Given the way that questing works in ESO, the gameplay for questing is fairly directed. It makes it very easy for the player to figure out where you need to go and what you need to do. Have you thought of any creative ways to maybe write, puzzles or mysteries? Given the way that gameplay already exists, is that possible to do in future content where maybe there's something the player can figure out without it being sort of shoved down their throat quite as directly?
We have little vignettes and things that happen all over the game. We call IC, or independent content. It's not really a full POI. It's not really a full quest even. It's just a little thing you stumble on. You can talk to some people and do things. We're always trying to add more of that stuff to the game because we love that. Those little things that you find. And yeah, we've talked about puzzles in the world that are just there, and if you figure out how to work them, you get a reward for them, things like that. So we're always brainstorming this kind of stuff. It's about prioritizing. What would be cool to add? What do we have time to add? But more importantly, what do you guys want? Sure. Because that's why we do things like this. Because we want to know, you like this, you don't like this. We don't want to spend time doing stuff that you guys really aren't interested in. So the more you tell us you want to see that stuff, the more likely it is that you'll see.
But certainly, Justice System, and then later stories and content for eventually Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood will pull us inevitably in that direction. So yeah, we'll be doing more of that. It's hard though, because it's so easily subject to misinterpretation by the players.
Yeah.
And then when the player misinterprets something that we think was obvious, the player is certain that it's our fault, and they don't like that. So it's hard. Yeah. You've got to come up with stuff that's pretty bulletproof.
Working hard. Working Sundays.
Okay.
I just wanted to piggyback on her zombie werefish comment. With the lore of the game, it already indicates that there is multiple types of lycanthropes, and they come from different regions. Has been thought of adding the were-lion and the were-bear and the were-shark and things like that in the future?
It's always on our list of expansion stuff we'd like to do. It has not yet risen to the level of
it's a pretty big long list.
Yeah, this is more important than this other stuff we're going to do. So yeah, I'd love to have werebears. Cool. Wereboars. I want to be a wereboar.
You got one more here?
Just to go off of what he's saying, like the quest in the Aldmeri side with the riddles, that was like one of my favorite quests from Gary.
Which
try and shoot. It was on the little island outside.
Oh, sort of the treasure hunt kind of a thing where you had to go.
Well, he had a whole bunch of like objects on there, and he's saying that you got to pick which object.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, I do remember that. Yeah, that was fun. We have some really great content designers that love to design puzzles. So and yeah, they're really cool. They're fun to sort of write around too and support. we just have a great team here. We really do. These guys are so much fun to work with, and they're so talented. There's so much raw talent in the studio, more than any company I've ever worked with. And I've worked with some great companies, so we're really happy to be here. So thanks a lot, you guys. We got to wrap it up.
Gina's making us leave.
Gina's being a bully.
No.
But thanks a lot. Great questions.
In case you haven't already noticed, Gina's the bad cop.
She's tough. Don't cry.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Me too.